Hi, everyone. Patrick Pfingsten from the Illinoize.com here again, joined by Litesa Wallace. She is a former state representative from Rockford, former candidate for lieutenant governor. And big news this week as we record this, she just jumped into the race for the new 17th district in the new congressional maps for 2022. Representative, welcome. Welcome back to the blood sport that is Illinois politics.
Hi, Patrick. Thank you so much for that warm welcome, and thank you for having me on.
So let me start here. Why get back into this? I mean, you spent some time in the legislature. You obviously had the unsuccessful run for lieutenant governor, which we can talk about. But you know, you've now had a couple of years to step away and maybe have a real life other than, you know, people in politics normally have. Why get back in the game now?
I come from a background of like human services and counseling, right? And so I've always, like my entire life, really wanted to help individuals, families, communities be able to do what they can and should do to thrive. It's been kind of the hallmark of my entire adult life. And back in about 2011, 2012, I really had the opportunity to deeply dive into how public policy making has huge impacts. And I think we know that, you know, kind of implicitly, but I don't think people often connect the dots as to how decisions that are made in our state and nation's capital can affect your everyday life, right? And so once I delved into public policy and then had the wonderful fortune of being able to represent portions of Rockford in the state capitol for almost 5 years, I loved it. I fell in love with bringing that background of helping people in the therapy room or in a group counseling session to what policies need to be in place to make sure that those people are able to be successful and families are able to be successful. So that's why I decided to be back in.
You come more from the progressive side of politics, I think is safe to say, and feel free to dispute that if you want. But I think that's maybe where your politics fall. And the 17th is a notoriously moderate district as it's been drawn over time, even though it's been pretty gerrymandered over the years, dating back to Lane Evans. You know, Sherry Bustos almost got beat. You know, obviously Phil Hare got beat in 2010 when he said something kind of off the walls. And you know, it's, even though it's been drawn a little bit more Democratic in this new map, is this a district that wants those progressive, I don't know if you want to like throw the AOC tie, but that more left-wing leaning kind of politics?
You know, I always find that question interesting because one thing about me, until that 2018 cycle, I had never labeled myself on the political spectrum. I always focused on, you know, I'll give this example. I always focused on what would it take for myself and my son when I was very young and he was very young. What would it have taken for us to be a successful, thriving family? What policies would have needed to be in place to make sure that I could feed him, clothe him, keep a roof over his head, and do all the things I needed to do without having to rely on social safety nets. And so those were the things that I fought for and championed when I was a legislator, got things done around that. And I will also say that in 2018, some things did seem very leftist, but some of those things are now state law and the law of the land of Lincoln, to kind of piggyback off of your beautiful photo back there.
I try to keep it pretty around here.
Yeah, so I think that there is an appetite for things that maybe a few years ago might have been considered very leftist, but now, particularly during the pandemic, we learned that there are ways that our government can and should step up to help families and communities. And I think that labels will hopefully kind of fall a little bit further away as time goes on and people really center the citizens of the state and the nation.
Lord knows Republicans had their own problems with accepting election results and the praying of the gospel of Trump, but there's been pushback on maybe where the Democratic Party has turned in the last few years, and this is maybe more obviously the right's going to complain, but even moderates, and you maybe saw some pushback in New Jersey and Virginia last week that
Yes.
They don't necessarily want a Republican Party that is beholden to a former president, and they don't want a Democratic Party that wants to raise taxes on everybody and thinks everybody should get everything for free. Is it hard to combine that idea of help people get up and make it, along with people who already feel like they're getting taxed too much anyway?
I think there is a way to find that middle ground. We really have to, like I said, focus on the things that people sit around their dining room table talking about. What, again, helps their family, what helps their small business, what helps their community be economically viable. I do believe that there's a way to balance those things. My own example of having had childcare subsidies in the past, it wasn't that I didn't have an education, training, and the ability to really go out and hustle and make money. It was some of the fields that I worked in were very low paying and did not pay a living wage. And so those particular types of programs, which by the way, have traditionally been very bipartisan, right? Because it's an opportunity for children to have exposure to early childhood, and it's an opportunity for the parents to get to work, earn some money for the family, help grow businesses in their community, but they can't do that without a program like that. So I think that there are programs and safety nets that our government offers that really do actually strengthen the economy around the family that might be receiving those services. So I think there's a middle ground. Making college affordable is another example. When you're able to do that, then you open up the door for future earnings for the next generation, less debt for that generation, which then means they're able to go out, purchase homes, purchase cars, do the consumer things that keep our economy rolling, keep the rest of us employed. So I think there's opportunity to find a middle ground.
But is there a difference in making college more affordable and wiping out student loans, or making college free for everybody, which one seems unfair to those of us who paid off our student loans, and two, does it make sense for the government to pay for people to go to college who could do better in the trades, or in a situation where maybe it's not the right move for them in the short term?
So and the technical question, is there a difference? Yes, there's a difference between, being affordable and wiping out loans. Luckily, I'm glad that you're in the land of I paid off all my student loans. I'm trying to get to that promised land. And I probably would have gotten there a lot sooner if, some of the education that I pursued had been a little more affordable, or if I'd have had a better paying job along the way. No matter how hard you try, sometimes it just didn't all gel together. But I think that being able to allow the future to start on a fresh footing, clean slate, and not be saddled by debt is, again, it will only bolster our economy. You mentioned the trades and more liberal arts education versus those two. I mean, that's a debate that's been going on for centuries. And even in the 20th century, that was a debate that Du Bois and Washington were having about the freedmen, right? What do they do? Do we talk about skilled trade? Do we think about all of the ways that life could be different if you have certain liberal arts training and you have this critical thinking capacity that puts you maybe on a different trajectory? I believe that that's something for individuals to decide, And I think that there is a way to find a balance between people's passions and their ability to invest their labor into that passion and for that labor to be valued. I think we can find that.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the pandemic for a minute, if you don't mind. you and I come from very different backgrounds. Obviously, I'm a white boy who grew up in a cornfield in one of the most Republican counties in the state, and you're obviously an African American woman, as if we couldn't see that on the screen. But there has been a big amount of vaccine hesitancy in both of our backgrounds,
Yes.
both among African Americans, both among rural whites.
Yes.
You know, even though I live in the suburbs now, and you see, you know, more masks and more, you know, vaccine appointments than I would have ever imagined downstate. But is it, you know, how do we get people on board here? Because it's become such a partisan issue, especially on the right. But there's an ongoing fear of institutional, you know, medicine, you know, in some African American parts of our country. This pandemic's not going to go away until people do what they have to do. And whether it's by mandate, whether it's by employer mandate, whether it's doing the right thing on their own fruition, you know, we're just not seeing enough people do it yet. What's the answer? Are there incentives? Are there stimulus payments? Are there appealing to people's better angels? I don't know the answer, especially on people in my background now, that I can give them good enough reason to go get this done.
Mm-hmm. You know, I think that you brought up a commonality that people very rarely talk about, and something that I often talked about, particularly when I was in the legislature. And even recently, I told some of the newer members of the GOP side of the chamber that you probably have a lot more in common with Black Caucus members than you'll ever think. And I stated that to a couple of new Black Caucus members as well. You probably have a lot more in common with some of the members of the GOP side of the aisle than you would imagine. And that's one particular area, the one that you just touched on, the hesitancy to take the vaccine. I think it's going to take a lot more trust in our government, which people have started, you know, we've been lacking that for a long time. It's going to take education that's specific to the voices, right? Hearing from those communities, trying to help understand exactly where they're coming from, and then talking about the science in a way that makes sense. But we will always probably have this hurdle or this debate around mandate, because who are we? We're the land of the free, right? Home of the brave, right? So we're founded on, you know, these notions of rugged individualism, of, you know, freedom of choice, freedom of speech, freedoms, right? And so we have to, you know, respect that, but we have to also get the point across to people that we do not have the rights and the freedoms to endanger other people. And that's where public health comes in. And we have to really be listening to the communities and finding out, you know, what exactly is the hesitation, right? So we know there's a hesitation, but then we probably just broad stroke it. But we need to understand what's the specific community's hesitation, and how do we help them exercise their choice to, you know, make their medical decisions as they would like to, but how do we help them realize they also have to balance those medical decisions in the time of a global pandemic and in a way that is respective of the health of the entire public? You know, there's that phrase, you know, my rights end where yours begin. And we have to figure out a way. And I think only listening to the communities and finding specifically why they're hesitant is the way we'll be able to do it. I don't think that mandates work, especially in a country, like I said, that it values freedom so much.
Mm-hmm. In that same vein, you know, in this new 17th district, you have kind of some of those Rust Belt parts of the state, you know, Rockford, Quad Cities, parts of Peoria, but you also have some, you know, struggling rural areas in that district as well. Which I think goes along the same lines of urban and rural that share some of the same problems that people don't talk about. But do you believe that there's a role for government or Congress, and what would it be in your job in the 17th, if elected, to help grow vitality, economic development, education, et cetera, in these wide swaths of the state that, while on paper look very different, the South Peoria homes that are falling apart, and the closed plants in Rockford, and the empty small town storefronts. There are many of the same problems, but in very different places.
Mm-hmm. And so you brought up an excellent point. I continue to say this district is geographically, racially, and economically diverse, right? But in that diversity are all these overlaps, things such as having, an adequately funded school that can provide quality education to your child, public health concerns, right? Access to health care. It's the same in rural and urban. There are many places where there are healthcare deserts where you cannot access healthcare. And then, of course, to the point about the economy, how do we make sure that small businesses are growing because they're the largest employers of citizens across the country? How do we make sure that the infrastructure is there? You talked earlier about comparisons between like the progressive parts of the party, and I think you made a little joke about AOC. I would say flat out, I would have voted for the infrastructure bill if I were in Congress. That brings back so much money. And we just learned today that I believe Illinois is going to go at $17 million or $1 billion that will come to be able to invest in the infrastructure, right? That will put people to work, to your point about skills and trades. It will bring about it. That has a ripple effect in the economy in and of itself. It'll bring about access to broadband. We have been talking for over 2 decades about the digital divide, and that exists in urban centers and in rural areas. This is a way to get people on some balance of parity. Having access to the internet opens up the world to individuals, and that's an opportunity to grow economies. But we have to find what those common grounds are. That happens from listening to people throughout such a geographically diverse area. And once we figured out what those common things are, we go forward, and hopefully they'll help fuel me and getting to DC to be able to fight for those things.
So do taxes need to go up, whether it's high income earners, whether it's across the board? Obviously the national debt is, higher than it's ever been in either of our lifetimes, and has continued to grow exponentially. We surely can't continue to afford government at the rate that it's growing without either less spending or more revenue. Do you support tax increases in Congress?
You've got to have a balance, right? You're talking to a single mom here. So I've always figured out how, what needs to be cut and what kind of revenues do we need to get? Do I need to take on a second job? Do I need to say we'll go down to, in my earlier time, do we need to go to a less expensive diaper brand? I know that sounds very minute, but and government budgets are extremely large and much more complicated than our own household budgets. But you have to have a balance between the two. We're not going to be able to cut our way out of everything, and we're not going to be able to tax and spend our way out of everything. So we've got to find ways, the congressional members have to find ways to be listening to their respective districts and then listening to each other about what each other's respective districts want, and finding that middle ground and that common ground to be able to decide what needs to be pared down and how we can go about getting revenues to fund things. We do have an interesting corporate tax structure. Perhaps there are opportunities there. We have workers who are helping companies make, unprecedented profits. To your point, profits we've never seen in a lifetime, right? And so how do we, get corporations to pay more of their share into the tax structure so that we're able to take care of the needs of maybe the seniors and the disabled, and having better school systems in our urban and rural areas, more education around COVID, the things that we just talked about, right? But we're not going to be able to cut, and we're not going to be able to tax our way completely out. It won't be one or the other.
I know you've got to run. You've got a busy day. So one last thing for you. We talked about this is a close district. Republicans think that they've got a real shot with Esther King, who is a veteran and has did very well 2 years ago, or I guess still last year, since it's still 2021. You're probably not going to be the only Democrat in this race. There's already been one announcement, and Senator Stottleman is still considering the race. If he doesn't, Representative West may get in. So it's not going to be a wide open primary. So what do you have to do to raise, spend, reach voters, and do what you have to do to both win a primary and a general in a tough district?
Yeah, you've made very important and interesting points. And to the point of Esther being a veteran, it is, Happy Veterans Day. And, my heart goes out to those who've made the decisions to be brave and sacrifice. My father's a Vietnam War veteran, and so and have a history in my family all the way back to the 411. At least what we can document of individuals who've served in our armed forces. But I do believe that the pathway really is combining what you can raise and who you can meet. And I think the real key in most of this is going to be what we talked about before: listening to the residents, listening to the voters. That's the way that you're able to fuel a campaign. You can't feel out of touch to individuals who you want to earn the trust and vote from. And you definitely cannot take what they say and abandon it. So I believe it's going to take quite a bit of an intricate kind of mix of what you can raise and who you can meet and what you'll be able to work toward in the campaign and moving forward. But it will be a very tough fight.
Former state representative Litesa Wallace of Rockford, new candidate in the 17th district. Representative, pleasure to see you again and catch up. And I'm sure we'll be talking again soon.
Yes, thank you for having me, Patrick. Thanks to your audience.